Hello, I'm Whalley, welcome to Lenscraft. In today's video, we're looking at 4 of my photos from the past 12 months. I'll be using these to share some tips and advice you can use in your own landscape photography. Each image has at least one recommendation you may want to adopt, but it won't always be obvious. I shot this first image in Keswick in the Lake District back in October 2019. I was using a Fuji X-T3 with a Fuji 16-80 lens. The camera ISO was set to 160 and the aperture to f11. This gave a shutter speed of 1/280th of a second. I also used a 0.9 or 3-stop ND grad filter on my lens. When I shoot landscape photography, it's usually from a tripod, but this image was handheld because I needed to react quickly. Ordinarily, I take my time looking around for the best angle and composition, but for this shot, I didn't have time because the light was changing so fast. The learning I want to share from this image is that I almost didn't shoot it. The conditions were so bright that I thought it was way beyond what the camera would handle and that I wouldn't be able to process it. Here's what the original unprocessed RAW file looks like, and it demonstrates just how much you can achieve in post-processing. So remember, just take the shot and worry about the processing later. Don't think something's impossible until you've tried it. Something else I want to highlight is that the starburst around the sun is missing from the original RAW file. That's because I've copied it from another image. This was the only frame which caught the bird in flight, and I liked it because it seemed to be flying towards the sun. Now if you want to create a starburst effect in the camera, you need to use a small aperture and cover part of the sun with anything in the frame. In this image, I put the sun behind the tree branches to help manage the contrast level, but also to try to create a starburst. But because the branches of the trees were moving around, the starburst only appeared in some of the frames. Remember, you'll hardly ever achieve the perfect shot in a single frame, so be prepared to make creative adjustments. The next image is from the Scottish Highlands back in April 2019. Again, I was using a Fuji X-T3 and a Fuji 55-200 lens. The ISO was set to 160 and I had an aperture of f9 giving a shutter speed of 0.6 of a second. The camera was mounted on a tripod and I was using a 0.9 or 3-stop soft neutral density graduate on the sky. The neutral density grad filter has helped balance the exposure between the bright sky and the darker mountains and foreground. The image is actually 3 frames which were stitched together in Photoshop. To help improve the image stitching, the camera's exposure has been set manually to expose all 3 frames the same. I've also overlapped each of the frames by around 1/3. Whilst all this is useful, it's not why I'm sharing this image. There are 2 other important reasons. First is the time when I shot this is around 20 minutes before sunrise, which is often when you get the best light. When a lot of photographers shoot a sunrise, they arrive around the time the sun's popping over the horizon. Whilst you can still get good images at that time, you're missing the best light. Once the sun's above the horizon, the landscape changes and you lose the subtle colours. Plan to be in position around 45 minutes before sunrise to be sure of getting the best light. This means taking extra care to plan your journey. This location is in the Highlands of Scotland and was a 45-minute drive from where we were staying. Most of the time we were on single-track road with no lighting. After we arrived, it's about a 15-minute walk in the dark from parking the car. This means a head torch is essential. When I shot this image, it was about 5:20 in the morning. Try working out what time I got up in order to leave and get this shot. It'll give you some idea of why careful planning is important. Planning is an essential skill for good landscape photography, but it's often ignored. In this example, we chose to drive to the location the day before so we could see it in the daylight. We worked out how to get there, where to park the car, and the best route to walk. We also looked at different positions to achieve the best composition. It was only when we were sure we knew what we were going to do the next day that we left. If you haven't been somewhere before, you can't expect to turn up in the dark and have everything fall into place. You must plan it out in advance. Now let's look at the third image. I shot this in January 2019 using a Fuji X-T2 and Fuji 16-55 lens. I had the camera ISO set to 200 to produce a quarter of a second exposure at f11. The camera is mounted on a tripod and I didn't use any filters because there wasn't much difference in brightness between the sky and the ground. What I want you to notice about this image is the detail in the snow. You can see the texture and shadow in the snow which gives it shape. Now compare this to the original RAW file. Notice how there's very little detail in the snow and the image is lighter. When I shot this image I overexposed it because the sun was tricking the camera into underexposing. But this has created a problem. When you have a lot of white tones in an image, you can lose the detail. It becomes difficult to distinguish between all the similar white tones on a monitor. In hindsight, I would have probably been better using the camera's exposure and then correcting it in editing. That would probably create a wider spread of tones in the snow, making it easier to see the detail. When you can't distinguish between similar tones, you lose the perception of detail, and that makes the image less interesting. Now there's two other problems I want to highlight in this image. First, it has a slight pink tint to it. It's the camera profile used in the editing software that's causing this. You can neutralise it by changing the profile or neutralising the colour in Photoshop or Affinity Photo. I'll be doing a future video about how to clean up the colours in an image. The other problem's that the tree branches on the left edge of the frame are distracting. Small problems like this can create distractions, so it's best to remove them. It's worth remembering to always check around the edges of a frame to see if you have any distractions. Sometimes you can change the position of the camera to exclude them, but sometimes like this you can't and you need to fix them in editing. The final image I want to talk about is this one that I shot on the 3rd of January 2020. It's taken from Burbage Edge in the Peak District looking back towards Higator. The camera was a Fuji X-T3 with a Fuji 16-80 lens. I had it mounted on a tripod and I used a 0.6 or 2 stop ND grad filter on the sky. With the camera ISO set to 160 and an aperture of f13, the shutter speed was about 1/9 of a second. But what makes this image special is the light. Notice how it's casting long shadows on the hills, which makes the landscape appear more three-dimensional. The long shadows are from the low sun, which is partly because it's winter and the sun never gets very high at this time of year. It's also around 30 minutes before sunset, which is when the light becomes more golden. But there's another feature of the weather that's helped to create this great light. Around an hour before I shot this, it was raining hard. Many photographers may have been tempted to pack up and leave, but we decided to wait it out. We could see that the weather forecast hadn't predicted the rain, although there was an approaching weather front. We could also see from the type of clouds and the distant light that this was a shower and was likely to break. If you take landscape photos after a heavy rain shower, you'll find the light is wonderfully clear and bright. If you're lucky enough for this to combine with a sunset, you could get magical lighting, as I have here. The point though that I want to stress is that if we didn't understand the weather, we would probably have left and missed this. So that's the 4 images that I wanted to share. Hopefully you've picked up a few points you can use in your own landscape photography. I'm Whalley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you next time for another video.